So here I am, reading a satirical piece about writing D&D scripts for your players, you know, a joke, and someone responded with this. No joke. I had a friend who desperately wanted to run a Vampire the Masquerade game, but spent so much time wiki diving that he ended up overwriting and bloating his campaign idea with deep lore nonsense. He eventually went so far as to write the characters we, the players, were supposed to be. We ended up never playing this game, and honestly, it killed the small amount of interest I had in Vampire the Masquerade to begin with. And you think that scripting is bad? You just wait until you hear this story. Hey everyone, this is my first time ever posting something on this subreddit, though I've occasionally lurked on it to read the tales of others. The events of my story take place a year ago when I was first getting into D&D 5th edition, and although I knew after it happened that I needed to share the story, I was afraid one of the group or the DM would read the post. Now, it's been over a year, and I have no contact with any of them, so I figured I'd recollect my thoughts and share them with all of you. So the story begins with me finding out there was an Elder Scrolls conversion of 5th edition, and after some searching, finding an ad for what was advertised as a level 1 to 40 campaign. It wasn't Gestalt, but players could take up to 2 full classes and levels, taking a warband of 9 player characters throughout the continent and regions of the Nirn setting. At the time, I had no idea how terrible 10 players in a party can be during combat, so I didn't see it as a big deal. To the contrary, because the DM had so-called co-DMs, they all basically just voiced some NPCs and played a couple PCs, I figured that this campaign would go smoother than my first campaign, which had a regular-sized party of 5, but tended to be slow due to us all being new players. So once I got accepted in, the DM, who was a nice bloke during the process, helped me through the process of making an Elder Scrolls 5th edition character, starting at level 2, namely a Meridia-worshipping sorcerer. While we were halfway through the process, he informed me that another player was playing a vampire, and another a necromancer. For those of you who don't know Elder Scrolls lore, Meridia's whole vibe is destroy undead, no exceptions. Here I am thinking her whole vibe is...
A new hand touches the beacon.
Anyway, as soon as I learned I was making this incompatible character, I offered to come up with a better fit, only to be told not to worry about it since both characters weren't openly undead or undead adjacent. Hesitant, but believing I could make this character play well with others, I ended up focusing more on an inherent distrust of undead, an intense fear of darkness when I wrote the character's backstory and personality. Much to my delight, when the first session came, I had a lot of fun, even if the party members were dragging out our first combat. The vampire player, who turned out to be the DM's real-world sister, was not able to make that first session, but the necromancer player was hilarious to interact with. Since we both knew out of character how much our characters would hate each other if things started off open and honest, we both intentionally had the characters interact on good terms about other things, my sorcerer completely unaware of his new friend's dark deeds. Session 1 goes by with a breeze, with our warband heading into some caves to try and rescue some people we were told were captured. In Session 2, we learned the cave is inhabited by necromancers, and I got to have some fun and act out my opinionated but naive character. Turns out the 2 captured people were 2 players that could not make it to the first session, one of whom being the DM's sister. From this point on, I'll call her Betsy. Betsy was playing this vampire Khajiit rogue, who the DM loved to brag was way older than anyone in the party, and even the continent-wide empire, being born in the 2nd era. The game takes place in the 4th. This bragging came off the wrong way to me, but I later learned that it was backstory he wrote for Betsy since she didn't know the setting. Unlike the grunge necromancer player who treated the opposition to undead by my character as something to work around out of the gate, Betsy's catgirl rogue started being the average loner rogue, who doesn't like being around others, and of course, my character saw most of the sass and outbursts thrown at him. At the time, I didn't mind this very much. Then, in Session 3, all that really occurs is that this cave dungeon became a proper dungeon, and circumstances caused half the party to reveal their supernatural natures. Half the party were lycanthropes, though that doesn't factor into this much. When Betsy's Khajiit rogue revealed herself to be a vampire, an angsty rant about not having wanted her undead state was more than enough for my character to see her as an annoyance, rather than a threat. In this setting, some vampires do feed on the willing, and although he harbored an inherent distrust for undead, he was willing to put that aside to fight the actual necromancers. Then things really started to go sour in Session 4. Betsy is a trucker in real life, and some real-life job prevents her from being home on a laptop. Instead of just rescheduling or postponing the games, the way this was handled involved her watching the DM stream the game on Discord, with her looking on her phone while driving a truck at night, so she could tell the DM what her character would do and where they'd go. Putting aside how uncomfortable the thought of someone focusing on their phone and playing D&D while driving a semi-truck is, the stream way of viewing things allows Betsy to see all the hidden locations and rooms in the dungeon. Unsurprisingly, this led her character to splitting from the party and looting many chests and exploring rooms while the rest of the party waited for the DM to attend to them. Turns out, the DM moving and rolling for a character who isn't sticking with the group sucks away most of the fun of a session. After an excruciating half an hour of the session just being Betsy's rogue looting things alone, the party found a large treasure room and we eagerly began to loot it ourselves, glad we finally had an opportunity to do something too. The DM had an exhaustive process of rolling on many tables based on the character's luck ability score, and since the party was 10 people, it was clear after many rolls that the DM was struggling to roll for the horde loot and the process would take some time. This was when a growing uneasiness I had with Betty that session became a full-on annoyance. The player proudly proclaimed that she wasn't going to put the DM through those rolls and she would be happy without the loot. After spending most of the session sucking up time by being a loner rogue looting things, she was guilting us for putting her brother through some loot rolls. Loot rolls he purposefully made complicated through his own luck ability score and many tables. To add to that, the next hour after the horde was just the rogue resuming her exploring alone and going directly to rooms she could see through the DM's god vision. Despite our characters getting lots of wealth and some of us getting really good magical items, I ended up leaving the session generally disappointed with the 5 hours I had spent in the game. I vented about it to another player, but he didn't really see it as badly as I did, as I ended up taking his advice and waiting things out. Look, things might improve once Betty gets her computer time back. Session 5 was once again Betsy in a semi-session, but that was hardly the thing any of us were focused on when the session began. The last session had ended with the party entering a room with enemies, ready to use our new gear, and the next session began with us realizing that our gear and gold was just gone. All of it. My character's +1 armored robe, an item I got at character creation for rolling a 100 on a D100 table, was just magically gone too, leaving my character in what was basically his undergarments. I initially assumed the DM was mistaken when he took it off my sheet, since I assumed some enchantment had returned items to the horde we took it from, but he confirmed that it too had suddenly disappeared. Suffice to say, all of our gold and loot just disappearing put a damper on the party mood. We returned to the horde room after the battle to find that not only was the loot not back there, but the adventuring gear we left behind to make space for loot and gold was also gone from the room. And of course, Betsy took the opportunity to act high and mighty over not taking the loot and putting the DM through all the rolls, especially since she didn't lose any of her adventuring gear in the process. The session ended with us progressing in this huge dungeon, with there coming a moment where Betsy knew out of character that some NPC was ahead of us to talk to, since, you know, she could see past the damn fog of war, and she instructed the party to stay behind so she could meet with the NPC alone. Tired of one person getting to do everything, my character refused, and surprise, surprise, it all got way worse. This NPC was the DM's own vampire DMPC, and Betsy's rogue was a part of the same group that was in the temple. Ignoring the fact that she was one of the kidnapped people the party was hired to save, it made no sense that she could claim loyalty to the DMPC's draconic master while having actively helped us kill a bunch of the same necromantic dragon cultists for the last 3 levels of the dungeon. So as you expect, I left the session feeling real annoyed about how Betsy's rogue was being favored for the last few sessions of plot, and being an avid reader of the subreddit, I absolutely dreaded what the inclusion of a DMPC could mean for the campaign. All of this wasn't enough for me to call it quits just yet.
How?
Then came Session 6. Oh, Session 6. We meet the dragon in charge of the cult. He's just good, or Neutral, I guess. Regardless, we're still level 2. We're not messing with any dragons, and since the entrance of the cave dungeon collapsed on us a while ago, we just want out of this place. My character gives the dragon some reverence, but inquires as to the location of his robes, since they mean something to him and don't belong to the dragon, even if the horde did. It is at this moment that Betsy's character leaves her draconic master's room to just retrieve the robes, which she just hands back to the dragon. It's at this point that I realize that whatever the hell the treasure losing fiasco was before, the player was in on it. So once the dragon gives us leave and tells the DMPC vampire to escort us out of the dungeon, the whole party begins to antagonize the vampire for leading the sect of necromancers that gave them all this trouble. My sorcerer leads the effort, and to my surprise, even Betsy's rogue gets real into the threats toward the vampire. Then, we're at the summit of the mountain this dungeon was built into. The arguments between DMPC and Betsy's rogue comes to a violent conclusion. Betsy says her rogue tries to push the DMPC off a mountain, and in the end, this results in the rogue falling with the DMPC, actively stabbing him as they fall distances they could not reasonably survive. This entire time, I'm having more fun than I've had in several sessions. I get to watch Betsy throw away her infuriating character and remove an unlikable DMPC at the same time. No matter what the DMPC tries to do to save himself and the rogue, they both fail, and both die from the fall damage. It's clear that the DM is upset, but the party remains. Only half of us, since the other half always left when the session started going into 1 to 2 in the frickin' AM. The group tries to cheer up with some humor. One of the players that I gave my concerns to initially then made a joke about divine intervention. Although he played a spell sword and the session was over, he playfully mentioned doing a prayer to Akatosh, god of time, and rolled a divine intervention dice. Rolling a 2. Both of us had a good laugh, but my smile left my face the second the DM started literally replaying events. Only this time, the Dragon Master burst through the mountain to try and save his 2 disciples, and in the chaos, the winds of his shouts begin to throw people off the mountain. In the end, this effort is useless, as even saved by the dragon, Betsy's rogue kills the DMPC. But what ruined all of this for me was what happened to the rest of us. The 3 players that still remained at this hour, namely me, the spell sword, and another rogue I've mentioned before now, were all thrown from the mountain in that chaos. My sorcerer and the rogue died in the fall. The spell sword would have died too if I hadn't brought up that he could become a werebear to become immune to falling damage at the last second. The DM had literally reverted time to try and save both his DMPC and his sister's PC, only for the DMPC to die anyway and for 2 other unrelated player character deaths to occur. If it hadn't been 2 AM with barely any members of the party present, I'm 100% sure that this would have caused a TPK, with the exception of the 3 lycanthropes. To add to all this, while I was still in shock of what just happened, Betsy decided to admit to everything she'd done now that my character was dead, and it didn't matter. She'd apparently had a solo session with the DM which took place after we took the horde loot and before the next session, under the justification that her truck driving hadn't allowed her to do much. She got to do this mini session where the rogue went around stealing everything in the horde and literally stripping my character for his robe without anyone noticing? They claimed that rolls were done, but I call BS on anyone being stealthy enough to cause a whole war band of adventurers to not realize all their heavy packs were not weightless and empty. I definitely call BS on my character being stripped of his clothing and not noticing. Finally, adding insult to injury, this master thief, which I will remind you is level 2, had time to return to the horde room and push all the adventuring gear and loot we took into a dark pit we couldn't recover it from. So, Betsy got to screw us all over for no particular reason, got her own mini session where everything went her way and most of the story tailored to her. In the end, when her choices led to character death, she had that death reversed and replaced with the death of 2 innocent party characters who hadn't chosen to tackle someone off a mountain. This was the final straw for me, but to the 2 siblings, they had done nothing wrong and were laughing it up. The DM had proudly stated he'd just make a new self-insert DMPC for the next session, and Betsy was happily relaying that she was sad my character died because she wanted to have her rogue romance him. I just politely said, I'm going to bed, and over the next few days, I refused to make a new character, ultimately leaving because I didn't want to be in a game with DMPCs causing near TPKs and blatant favoritism towards party members. TLDR, DM's sister has an edgy loner rogue who antagonizes my character and the party, stealing from and acting against them. The player gets propped up as this pinnacle of storytelling by the DM, and she gets most of the focus in story and in-game since the sister is playing while driving a semi-truck at night. When her actions cause her and the DM PC to die, the DM reverts time to try and save both characters, resulting in a near TPK for the party members still in the session. After my character died, they gleefully told me about all their misdeeds, and both were unable to see they were being unfair assholes. I chose to leave rather than make a new character. There is so much going on here, notably favoritism and DMPCs. I've covered both topics extensively in previous episodes. In short, DMPCs are not great, especially when they take over the spotlight. You can have NPC allies that assist the party in combat, notable NPCs. That's good, actually. I think that's great for storytelling. However, having an NPC that steals the spotlight away from the players completely shatters the game in two. The story is about the players. They're the main characters, not some NPC. If you find that your NPC is taking story beats away from player characters, you're doing NPCs wrong. They are supporting cast members, not the main characters. As for favoritism, I think favoritism is perfectly avoidable, and frankly, easy to avoid. I have seen a lot of anti-family member and anti-partner sentiments going around with D&D parts. Like, you can't play with your special someone, or you can't play with any family members. That is really, really stupid. It is very possible to avoid favoritism in your D&D groups. Just fall back on the rules. As a DM, let yourself use the rules as they are written. It is really easy to do that, to avoid favoring a party member that you have a pre-relationship with. I understand that can be hard. It's not just people that are part of your family. It can also be friends as well. Just make sure to fall back on the rules if you find that you're having trouble balancing the way you treat a player when compared to the party. I don't think I have to say this, but seriously guys, don't play D&D when you're driving, especially when you're doing a semi-truck delivery. I mean, come on, do not do that. It is incredibly, incredibly dangerous. It is a miracle that there was no accident, because damn, that is really bad. And also, if you do have a party member that is playing on their phone, they don't have access to a computer, don't have the DM stream the game into Discord, just have a player stream the game into Discord. That's what we do, because I have a friend whose computer crashes a lot, so that's what we've ended up doing, is just having one of the players stream the game into Discord and having me move his character where he wants. It is much simpler, much easier, and prevents players from having DM-fueled God vision. Alright, if you guys enjoyed this episode of RPG Horror Stories and you want to let me know, then please do leave a like. If you want to see more of my content, then please do hit subscribe and subscribe to Crispy's Tavern. And finally, if you want to leave your own stories or thoughts, go down to the comments down below. If you can't think of a comment, leave the comment fall damage to let me know you made it to the end of the video. And that's like, comment, subscribe. I will see you all next time. Farewell.